Well, welcome back to Open to Truth, a podcast all about exploring big ideas and discovering truth together. My name's Clint.
Hey, I'm Tony. Welcome back.
And recently, just everything going on culturally in the nation, I've been trying to get my news and some commentary from a lot of different sources.
Yeah.
One of them is Sam Harris.
Love that guy.
Super popular public intellectual thinker.
Yep.
Has a podcast called Making Sense.
Great podcast. You should check it out if you haven't.
Great podcast. But I've run into criticism, not really publicly, but just people that know me.
Yeah.
Why do you listen to Sam Harris? Like, he's an atheist.
One of the four horsemen, so proclaimed, right?
Right, back in the early aughts.
Who are they?
Or noughts. What do you call the 2000s?
The naughties.
The naughties.
The 80s, 90s, and naughties.
He was one of, I forget where that was dubbed, who did that,
Yeah.
but it's the four horsemen. Christopher Hitchens, Richard Dawkins, Daniel Dennett, and Sam Harris.
That's it.
Yep.
That's it.
He was the young buck of
Yeah,
the
he was
the
the
crew.
young buck. Yeah.
But now he's, at this point, I think he's like 52 or something.
Really? Okay.
Something like that.
He looks like a Ben Stiller, a very articulate, well-spoken Ben Stiller.
Yeah.
That's Sam Harris, if you haven't been introduced to him. Just a very... what I so appreciate about him and why I listen to the podcast is because of how articulate he is and measured in his speech. Like, he's not just ranting unconsidered opinions, and he's not even this overtly charismatic sort of persona. It's just, here's a reasonable man sitting down to think along with you, you know? And I love that because he kind of walks you through it.
I view him as someone who loves the truth.
Yes.
And wants to find it wherever it may be.
Yeah.
Now, what's interesting is that him and I have come to a different conclusion on a rather large topic, and that is whether or not God exists.
Yeah, it's a big one, that one.
So what I wanted to do in this episode is kind of get a little more clarity on what exactly is an atheist, or what claims would be being made there. What's the difference between that and an agnostic?
Yep.
And maybe some different lessons or implications we can learn about what it means to hold that position.
Yeah.
And what
exactly is being
really
claimed with
there.
each one.
Yep.
Sure thing. Yeah.
So where to begin? Well, I guess defining the terms. I think these can be used pretty loosely, pretty broadly. Maybe we start with theism, the claim that there is a God, that God exists. And now typically that will mean some kind of like traditional notion of God. Like, properly speaking, theism would be the claim that there is an omnipotent or all-powerful, all-knowing, all-good, eternal, everlasting being that is maybe
unembodied being,
spirit, atemporal. There's all these collection of concepts boiled into theism.
Yeah.
And so when you define it that way, you could, there's a long conjunction of properties.
Yes.
Whereby if you were to reject any of those,
even one of them,
then you're no longer
a theist.
Technically a theist.
Yep.
I think we want to use it a little less specific than that.
Yeah.
And maybe, I don't know how you feel about ultimate reality.
I love that.
Do you?
Yeah, I actually do like ultimate reality.
As a definition of God?
I think so. Because not to derail us too much here, but as somebody having the human experience, inquiring, when I boil down to like, what is it really that I'm searching for existentially? I want to know what's real. That's really what it comes down to. What is ultimately real? And as a Christian, that the foundation of it all seems to be this source, God, who sort of it all comes from. But I think ultimately that's what I'm looking for, is a bedrock of some kind.
What I don't like about calling God ultimate reality.
Yeah.
Well, okay. I do think that's the case. But what I don't like about using that term is that I guess it's not super helpful because someone who doesn't agree with me can also use the term.
Yeah.
Like Sam Harris would also think there's ultimate reality. It's just that it's matter
very
and
different
energy
than what you think it is.
Yeah. It's not a divine being.
Sure.
So I don't want to like equate God and ultimate reality in that way.
Okay.
But
that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
At least for like the purpose of like trying to get clear on the distinction between the different views.
Yeah.
You might at the end of the day think that ultimate reality is divine in some way.
Yeah, right.
So how do we want to use this term that makes it helpful to classify all these issues?
You're still speaking about theism, you mean?
Theism, and for the purpose of contrasting it with atheism and agnosticism.
Yeah, great. When I think about theism, sort of the broadest definition that I could give to theism, we went through omnipotent, all-knowing, the
all
narrow
those magnificent
definition.
properties.
What might be the loosest definition of theism that would still tick somebody over into that camp? For me, then, there's a belief in something other than the physical. I think that's wrapped up in theism. Like, it might be called the supernatural, but naturalism is not presumed to tell the whole story for the theist. And I think that supernatural reality is personal in some way. Because I can imagine, like we were saying before, we've met agnostics, for example, who might say they're spiritual, and who knows what they mean by that. They could mean a million different things. But it's not clear that they mean there's a personal, immaterial being. That seems to tiptoe into theism for me, right?
I also feel tempted to include some kind of like responsibility clause into it. Call it providence, sovereignty, or I feel like I want to say the word creator.
Okay, yeah.
That something like that is involved with not just that there is the spiritual being out there that is personal, but is like connected to this reality in some way, like bears responsibility for it, started it, created it,
stewards it, something like that.
Yeah.
Is involved with it in some way. Because we didn't mention, but we've got deism too. Which is that there is this being, but he's not really interested in what's going on. He stands at a distance and just sort of watches it unfold.
Right. Yeah. So that would maybe be a brand of theism. Again, depending on how you define these terms, I know some like philosophers of religion would really want to be more specific on what theism is. But for our purposes, sure, a supernatural reality that's extra material or beyond this kind of realm and moral
the space-time realm.
And has influence over it, let's say. Okay, so if that's theism, then theism, to use, there's this atheist, Anthony Flew, that really wanted to be more precise on how we're using this term. And let's just use the prefix how we do in a lot of other situations, like moral. Just means it doesn't have to do with the moral realm. It doesn't mean immoral. Just amoral. Or asymmetrical. It is not symmetrical. We're not saying anything about what its shape looks like.
What it's
not symmetrical.
It's not that.
So an atheist is someone that does not endorse the claim of theism.
So the way you said that, when I'm interacting with folks, I will see them use that definition they'll first call themselves an atheist.
Okay.
And then when you ask what they mean by that, they'll say, I don't subscribe to theism, or I don't know if there's a God, or they won't make the other strong claim that there is no God, right? Which is an assertion, a claim to knowledge just as much as theism is.
Yeah, and let me take a step back with just what we're doing with these labels. I think it's kind of interesting and fun to horse around with the labels, but in some way, it doesn't matter a ton. Here's what we're trying to do. There are a host of different mental states and attitudes that you can have about these topics.
Yeah.
And insofar as it's helpful to slap a little word on it that we all kind of get what that means, then that's helpful to communicate about.
Yeah.
So what I don't want to do is like exclude some like maybe really commonplace mental attitude that people have just because I'm so committed to like, oh, this is what atheism has to mean. Sure. It's like, well, yeah, someone just may feel like I don't possess a commitment to theism.
Yes.
Someone might also say, I possess a commitment to the claim there is no God. Do you want to? I don't know.
Is it helpful to quibble over that?
Yeah,
I know what you
which
mean.
one's the atheist? Both.
Yeah.
I mean, and there's different ways. Like maybe you want to call it a positive atheist versus a negative atheist. The positive one would say is making a claim there is no God.
Yeah.
And is making a knowledge claim.
Yeah.
Whereas the negative atheist
I
is
don't believe there
like
is a
an
God.
more atheist, or maybe you'd rather say a non-theist.
Yeah.
Someone who is not subscribing to theism.
Yeah, yeah. So where does agnosticism fit in for you? Or
So
it's in there?
agnosticism, again, maybe there's a positive negative distinction there.
Yeah.
But it's someone who is making the claim to not possess knowledge in either direction of this issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I am claiming that I do not know whether God exists, and I do not know whether God does not exist.
Yeah. And isn't there a stronger form, maybe this is just skepticism, but isn't there a strong form of agnosticism that's like, I don't think we can know if a God exists or not.
Yeah,
I
totally.
don't think it's knowable.
So there's a strong and
I
weak
abstain.
agnosticism.
Yeah.
Yep.
Right. Okay.
One is I do not know,
Yeah.
and the other is I cannot know.
Yeah.
Wow.
Wow.
Stronger claim.
Yeah, this is a strong claim. Yeah.
So I don't know if that is helpful at all. Maybe it's not. Just maybe to reiterate, these are labels that you don't want to like box somebody in necessarily. Really try to figure out the person that you're having a dialogue with, like what is their mental attitude.
That's what's more important.
And then like, are we using the
Which
word
camp do you
right?
belong to? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. So what about like arguments in favor of these positions, either agnosticism or atheism? I'm probably more familiar personally with the arguments in favor of atheism because of all the background I did with polemics and apologetics and that sort of thing. Less so with agnosticism, although maybe there is for the strong agnostic. Maybe he has arguments that support his strong claim that he can't know something.
And again, this is where that it is kind of important to try to be really clear what we mean by the terms.
Yeah.
Because like these positions, you said, well, which one? Like the positive atheist that's saying I'm making the claim that there is no God is, offering a claim about how the world is.
Yeah.
And thus should have some evidence to back up that claim or an argument.
Yeah.
Whereas the other interpretation, like of atheist
Yep.
or the negative atheist, is just saying, I don't subscribe to that claim. And thus isn't offering, they're not putting anything on the table.
Yeah, yeah.
And
They're actually abstaining from...
They don't need to
Yeah.
present evidence because it's not a claim about the world.
not a
They're
position.
They're
Yeah.
reporting to you something about their mental attitude.
Yeah, yeah.
So you could then ask that person, oh, what do you think about why, or what is it about your life experience that led to this moment right now where you find yourself not
Yeah.
having the belief that God exists?
Yeah.
Whereas the other case is, how do you find yourself in the position where you have the belief that God doesn't exist?
Yeah.
See how that is a little bit different?
Yeah, yeah.
So, we could go for a pretty long time about arguments for both of these, but the argument for the negative atheist, the one who just happen to not have the belief
Yeah.
that God exists, would just be an evidential one. So I don't feel like I've come across enough evidence in my journey so far to suggest that God does exist.
Yeah. Which is also something that the agnostic, not soft agnostic. What do we call
Weak. No, that's fine. Hard and soft.
it? Yeah, okay.
Sure.
Okay.
So they would be in a similar boat. Yeah. And
They could say the same thing.
And maybe what's happening here, that some wires are crossed. A negative atheist would include someone who's an agnostic.
Yes. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
It's a Venn diagram there. Something's going on. Yeah.
And maybe even a deist, as you mentioned earlier.
Yeah. Yeah, sure.
Just a non-theist. I'm atheist.
Yep. How about the strong form of atheism? What are some of the bigger, what's maybe the biggest or a couple of the biggest arguments we might run into? I think problem of evil is one that we tackled a couple weeks ago.
And the reason that it is that one is probably employing a stronger, more robust definition of theism. So when you tack on that atheism, again, you have to go back. What did you mean by theism? If that means what you and I kind of agreed on, the supernatural being extra physical or beyond the physical and is like kind of involved with what's going on, I don't know if there are that many good arguments for positive atheism there. And most, I think, thinkers in the space that would identify as atheists would say as much.
Right.
Just because it's kind of an impossible thing to prove that it doesn't exist,
Yes.
You just run into the problem of the absence of evidence isn't the evidence of absence.
Yeah.
And so there's really no way for me to showcase that thing doesn't exist in some way.
Yeah.
Now, when you start to tack on extra properties like omnipotence, omniscience, or omnibenevolence, that's where the problem of evil kicks in.
Yes.
How can God be all good and allow
All this suffering.
this amount of evil or this type of evil?
Yep.
And so that pulls the rug out from under a subscription to that kind of theism.
Yep.
So I don't believe that God exists how you're describing God.
Can we talk?
Or another one, maybe, sorry to...
That's okay.
Another one that you'll hear Sam Harris talk about sometimes. He has this cute little... I don't know if it's original with him, but this cute little maneuver of saying, look, even you, Clint, as a Christian,
theist.
you are an atheist about Zeus and Thor.
About thousands of gods.
Yeah, many that have filled up these pantheons.
Yeah.
I have just gone one step further than you. I include Yahweh amongst them of the non-existent gods. So that's kind of an interesting little play on words there.
How does that strike you?
Well, I think using the term atheism a bit differently there.
Yeah.
Because I don't think it's technically right to say I'm an atheist about Zeus, because I don't think Zeus fulfills the concept of God meaningfully.
Right.
It's like the pseudo half person that like sleeps with human beings and I don't know.
Yeah.
Has children. It's just kind of bizarre. So it wouldn't really fill my traditional concept of God.
Right.
There's no reason to think Zeus is all powerful or all knowing or all good by any means.
Right.
So I'm not an atheist about Zeus. I'm not a believer that Zeus exists.
You're agnostic about Zeus then? Or you're a soft Zeus atheist? Or you just want to use a whole separate word altogether?
I want to use a separate word that doesn't involve claims about deity, because I don't
Because
view
Zeus has nothing to do with deity. Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
I do think that.
Right.
Yeah. Certainly doesn't approach ultimate reality.
Right.
Because that definition.
Yeah.
I don't view it as like the creator or anything. Even in the Greek mythology, Zeus isn't creator.
Yeah.
So
can we talk a bit about burden of proof, or maybe as an inquirer what the appropriate starting position is? Like, it's almost obviously nobody comes out of the womb a blank slate. Like, we're all embedded in a culture.
Yeah.
So we will probably all adopt one of these lenses unknowingly as we grow up. Mm-hmm. But assuming for a moment that you could have a man born apart from his culture, what would be the most appropriate starting point? Should we start by assuming God exists and look for evidence? Should we start by assuming naturalism and discard look for supernatural evidence? Or do you start from just the complete agnostic position? Say, I know nothing about this place I am or what's going on here.
Yeah. So this philosopher, Anthony Flew, that I mentioned a little bit ago, wrote this paper called The Presumption of Atheism. I think it was 1977, and made a pretty big splash. Tons of articles have been written about it and commented on it. And the basic idea is, like we should start with atheism, not positive atheism. That deserves just as much scrutiny as theism.
Got it.
But in the sense of non-theism, to just find yourself lacking the belief that God exists, or not subscribing to theism, that should be the default starting place. And he draws a parallel from our legal system of the presumption of innocence rather than the presumption of guilt.
Right.
So we just kind of we're waiting on evidence to showcase a difference.
To sway us either way. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, okay.
Which I'm fine with that, I think.
I'm fine with that in principle. What's tricky is because we are each born embedded in a culture, we all have these biases that are tough to shed. It's tough to ever get to that actually neutral, inquiring position. I feel like growing up a theist, I want theism to turn out to be true. You know what I mean? I feel like, and so there can be a tendency or a bias.
Why do you want that?
Oh, I think it's because it's the map I've been using for 29 years or whatever it is. You
The
know?
map of meaning.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's my chart for the world and has been the way I've looked at the world for so long. It would be destabilizing to
Yeah.
discover that wasn't true.
It would just be like, it would be useful if it were true too. Like it would,
Yeah, it would be great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'd have to spend a lot of energy if it weren't the case to kind of rebuild a new map.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's this emotional resistance. And I think, frankly, that's true for somebody who's grown up a hard atheist as well. That I think there's a tendency for there to be some strong emotional resistance to arguments in favor of theism, because you don't really want that to turn out to be true. What a hassle that would be to have to upend your worldview and deal with that. So on either side, we don't come out blank slates, and it's a struggle to act like one, you know?
Yeah. The intellectual virtue of charity
Yeah.
and openness is tough in this arena when
Yeah.
you've grown
What do
up
you
with
think
something
the
so
prescription
essential.
is for that? How do you, just becoming aware of your own biases, I guess, is a good first step?
I think that's a good first step, yeah. And getting into finding a real person that you can engage in
Yeah.
dialogue with. Or actually, no, it doesn't even have to be like sit down face to face, although that would be great. I mean, I would love to do that with Sam Harris. But insofar
mate.
as
One day.
insofar as I can hear his thoughts on this matter through a podcast or YouTube or something, it's helpful to hear another person's perspective that also possesses, at least to some degree, these intellectual virtues.
Yeah. Yeah, I do think that, recognizing your own bias is a good first step. Next step is to enter dialogue. You know, like if you are a lover of truth, then you have to enter into dialogue with people who disagree with you and expose yourself to their ideas. Try to present the strongest form of their argument that you can. JP talks a lot about that, like steel manning the other person's argument.
Yeah, I like that term.
Yeah, making sure you really understand where they're coming from in the strongest possible terms. And then see, does it convince you or can you knock it over? And if it's knocked over, hopefully both of you learn something, you know? But entering into those conversations with that intellectual charity, I think is the best thing you can do to grow it that way.
And what I like about the Anthony Flew position, the presumption of atheism, is that it embraces what I think is a really useful and correct starting place for epistemology or the study of knowledge, and that's evidentialism. That evidence comes first. Like, just be in pursuit of evidence. Don't believe something that you don't have evidence for.
Yeah.
And then believe things when you do have evidence for them.
Yeah.
Just putting evidence front and center in the pursuit of truth and knowledge.
It's funny that needs to be said or that needs to be talked about, you know?
Yeah.
Like, do we just don't do that oftentimes?
So, I mean, this might just be old-fashioned at this point, but I think for a while in the 16th, 17th century, you had fideism was on the rise, or that the things of God and spirituality were totally beyond the realm of evidence, and so just kind of let the faith apparatus run wild, and
right,
you don't really need evidence for these kind of claims.
Yeah.
But I just don't find that to be super persuasive.
Yeah. So I would encourage you, if you're listening to this podcast and you are a theist and you look around and you don't know a single atheist, or you're not in conversation with somebody who thinks differently than you, scan your social spheres and your relationships, and I would challenge you to enter in, grab lunch, grab coffee with somebody and ask them.
You'd be surprised where you can find them.
Yeah.
Like we were at lunch the other day. I guess it was before the pandemic now.
Yeah.
But we're just sitting at a local tavern and kind of overheard some old dudes talking in the corner, and they were agnostic and atheist.
Yeah, discussing life and spirituality.
You know, we kind of stepped out of our comfort zone and did something a little bit socially weird and just kind of turned around and said, hey, we were kind of eavesdropping a little bit, heard you guys talking about it, and just kind of
we talked for like 30 minutes. That was great.
Struck up a conversation. It was good.
It was very friendly. Certainly friendlier than in the YouTube comments section. Like, that's probably not the place to try to have these discussions, or even on Facebook, really. Like,
now, another piece to this that I think, I don't know if it's implied from the presumption of atheism necessarily, but another filament of this, at least that I've come to be persuaded about, is the rationality of atheism, agnosticism, and theism.
Yeah.
So not the most popular view ever, but I think I'm coming from the position that all three of those positions you could be rationally justified in believing any of those.
Yeah, right.
Which may strike you as odd that
Yep.
you could be rationally justified in thinking that opposite claims, that one person could be justified in this claim that is the opposite of this one.
Are you saying that based on each person's personal evidence that they have encountered throughout their life? Like somebody who hasn't seemed to have much evidence for God, or would say, I have never had a spiritual experience, I just find myself not to be theistic on those grounds. Whereas somebody who has claimed to have a bunch of spiritual experiences maybe needs to explain those a different way and has evidence in their mind for theism. Is that
I am
the difference?
saying that, yeah.
Yeah.
So
That's what accounts for it? Yeah.
that's right. Your available evidence.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I could easily see someone that, and again, so a certain brand of atheist would discount or give a alternate explanation for your religious experience that
Yes.
you're counting as evidence.
Right.
That's not what I'm saying. That's not what's going on, where you have to, you don't have to suspend your disbelief that is a thing that can occur
Yep.
for somebody.
Yep.
What you're saying is that it's at least possible that both sides could be rational in their justification.
Yeah.
So, like for me, I think I can easily imagine someone, if God were to exist and God has or wants to reveal himself to human beings in ways that are private and not public, then it could very well be the case that some individuals have more evidence for God's existence than others.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Just the way their lives have unfolded has led them to different conclusions.
So, and another pressure point that this pushes on is the whole project of natural theology.
Yeah. Which we did an episode on.
We did.
If you haven't seen that, go check it out.
And kind of that project is to suggest that God has done some general revelation. You could find out that God exists by enough careful study of the observable world, or even from your armchair, just in your thought life.
Yeah.
You could search through proper philosophical means to discover that God exists.
Yeah.
If that project is not misguided, like that's a successful thing, then it doesn't really make sense that atheism could be rationally justified.
Because the rational armchair philosopher would arrive at the conclusion that God exists.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you don't think that those arguments work, it makes space for all the positions to be rationally justified.
And so for you to hold you don't think the natural theology
I don't.
project succeeds.
I don't happen to. Yeah.
Yeah.
And what I like, this isn't a reason to think that I'm correct about this, but what I like about the position is it's helped me treat people that think differently than me on this topic far more charitably, approach it with more humility.
It's not as cut and dry as it,
or just that it's not within my power to convince them.
Yeah.
The evidence that you need, I think, or that God would be interested in giving to human beings is not something that Clinton can just give to you.
Yeah.
It's an experience of
Yeah.
God's divine love in your conscience.
Right.
Yeah, and if you haven't had that for whatever reason,
Yeah.
then you might be justified in your certain brand of atheism or agnosticism.
Yep.
So I think that helps me approach conversations more charitably. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. When you start the conversation by not thinking this person is clearly misguided.
Yeah.
You know.
Not only are they wrong, but they should think that they're wrong.
Yes. Right.
But I'm dropping that second one.
That they should think
I happen to think that their position is incorrect.
Yeah.
But I don't.
But you can't blame them for holding it.
No.
Yeah.
And if I were in their shoes, I would think the same thing.
Yes.
But
Right.
if I had their available evidence,
Yeah.
then I would. But I have my different available evidence that I'm going off of.
Yeah.
After all, it's the only one I have.
Yeah.
And
That's what we're all doing.
Yeah.
Actually.
And I've come to the conclusion that I think God exists. And I should entertain my, atheist agnostic brother who's suggesting hey, Clint, be careful. You shouldn't test the spirits.
Yeah,
you know,
right.
Don't automatically assume that just because you had a special feeling in your chest in a worship service that there's this deity out there. Like, isn't that much more easily explained in another way?
Yeah.
And like, yeah, I want to take on that argument and think through it, but I think we're all just kind of responsible for handling our own available evidence. And so another way of putting this, I don't look down on intellectually or as a thinker Sam Harris for being an atheist.
Right. No.
I genuinely think that he's doing his best with the available evidence that he has.
Yeah.
And I would even go further and say it could very well be that actually he has more justification for believing theism than I do. It's just with the different...
you mean atheism?
No, I meant theism.
Sam has more justification for believing theism than you do?
I'm saying that could be the case, but isn't ascribing those experiences to God or that God bestowed them.
I see what you mean. There's another explanatory story.
I mean, if you know, look into Sam's story. I mean, that dude has done quite a bit of exploration into the contemplative practice.
He teaches spiritual contemplative. He has a whole app designed to awakening spiritually. So
right, and he gives an atheistic, naturalistic spin on like the underpinnings of that. Yeah. I would give a different interpretation of what's going on.
Right. But that is fascinating. That's what has always, not to turn this into just a podcast where we talk about Sam, but that's what's always been so intriguing to me about him is rather than a total rejection of all things spiritual, like you often get from self-proclaimed atheists, he seems one who doesn't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. His explanatory story is different, but the phenomena, the experience, that sort of thing, he's still very much interested in and willing to talk about and explore spiritual practice. So he's he's in a unique spot, you know? Yeah. He's not as hard as some atheists would want him to be, and he's not as spiritual as the Christians would want him to be.
If I felt comfortable speaking freely,
I hope that you do.
No, if to him in that moment.
Yeah.
I would suggest I think you have experienced God.
Right.
But you're just not.
We have different names for it or something. Yeah.
I think that's all I really wanted to get to with
absolutely
that. And for sure, there's probably more to talk about with it, but just I hope that's helpful to kind of think more clearly about what we mean by those terms. Yep. Don't feel like we have to box people in with a label. Try to get at what's going on in their mind or soul.
That's just good life advice.
Yeah.
You know?
And then let's worry about the labels later.
Yeah. If they're at all helpful. And if they're not helpful, ditch them.
Right.
Yeah. So, if you've got something to add to the conversation, we'd love to hear from you. Well, you're welcome to join the conversation. You can do that by leaving a comment on this video or writing into the show at opentotruth.com or email us opentotruthpodcast@gmail.com. We'd love to hear from you and interact with your questions and comments as well.
And just so you know, we do have a weekly blog if you like to read about ideas rather than just hear about them.
Yeah.
That comes out every week, Wednesday or Thursday. So be sure, there's a little link below this video and on our website just to sign up. It'll only be one email a week, but
you're not getting spammed.
No. It's a 3 to 4 or 5 minute read on the topic of the week. Yeah, just kind of get your mind.
And we're not trying to
thinking.
sell you anything. It's content you want. It's just interesting philosophical musings. So sign up. Yeah, you'll be better for it. All right, we'll see you next time, guys. Stay curious.
See ya.